Welcome to our live event. We are doing Christmas in July, so we have a little bit of snow today to talk about in our project. My name is Colleen Tauke, and we're so glad that you're joining in with all of our activities that we're doing all the month, all throughout this whole Christmas in July promotion. And you can always download patterns, usually always in the comments section, or if a QR code pops up, you can always use your phone to just scan across it and take you to that pattern so you can download and see all kinds of fun other maybe Christmas projects that you want to get involved in. Maybe you want to learn a new skill. Maybe it's a knitting project or craft project you want to pick up. I've seen some really interesting projects. Yesterday I was looking in on a little knitting project, making a Christmas stocking. I was thinking, oh, what yarn do I have? So we have all kinds of things available for you in the Christmas in July promotion. Christmas Wonderland is the project we're going to be working on today, and you can see it here. This was originally inspired by a border print fabric. When I was shopping, I found this fun snowman border print and thought, I don't know what I want to make with it, but I picked up a few items that I thought coordinated with it, and home it went with me to later turn into a project. So also, I forgot to tell you, if you're watching for the first time or if you are a return watcher, pop in and say hello and let us know where you're watching from. If you're a big snowman fan, let us know, because there are people who love Santas. There are people who love snowmen and collect. And so maybe this snowman kind of project fits into your repertoire of Christmas decorating. But using a printed stripe, a design that has a very defined line through it of pattern is always a challenge. So sometimes quilters get stuck when they see printed stripes and they don't know exactly what to do with them. And sometimes quilt shops will let you know, oh, like here is a project we've made from this printed stripe. So you have an inspiration to get you started. But one thing to always remember is to kind of think ahead. Maybe you want to have 4 pieces. In this case, let me pull back here so we can look at this print. This snowman strip here, this is the printed design. The little zigzag pattern on each side is a mini border that's part of the printed stripe. And I would show you the fabric, but I don't have anything left from this snowman. I had only purchased about half a yard of it because the stripes went in a column across from salvage to salvage. And I knew that I could get my 4 pieces out of that off of for a tabletop or a table runner. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I looked ahead to make sure that I had 4 pieces that I could cut out across. The selvage ran along this edge so that they were stacked, and I could cut off those pieces to use in a project. So whenever you're looking at a printed border print, kind of in the back of your mind, make sure that you have enough repeats or similar repeats. Okay, I have another example because this is something I kind of wanted to address, because a lot of times when I was working in quilt shops, quilters would go, but I don't know how to use that. Where do I cut it? So you may not find this exact print because this has been a few years since I purchased this one, but other ways to look at border prints. I have a quilt here. I do like snowmen. I don't specifically decorate with snowmen at Christmas time, but I live in Iowa and we have plenty of snow. So here we go. You can hear it within this quilt. You can see I used 2 repeats within it. So I made it a large square. Whether or not it's the exact repeat doesn't really matter. Just as long as you have a clear piece that you can cut out. And you can see that I use those just individual snowmen, fussy cut into squares, but I use 2 rows. It doesn't have a defining line between these snowmen. They were just kind of plopped on. There was snow between. So it was a little bit easier to have it blend as a big block then. But you can see these are all directional. They're close and similar in repeat, but not exact. So close counts sometimes in quilting. But you can cut pieces. You can fussy cut, which means to pick a character to put in the middle of your block and then measure out a certain distance so you can fussy cut and center a design within a square. Or you can take a section, and I was kind of using these snowman edges and saying, okay, I'm going to try and center these guys. So at least I get maybe 4 of the large snowmen within a block here. And then on this one, I was trying to go, I didn't have too much leeway on this one. There was a little piece of waste on one side, and in order to get the length I needed, I could get 3 snowmen centered somewhat along each side of the table topper that I was creating. Other prints, and you know that I like to pick up fabric and don't always know exactly. Here's the snowman print. This is all I had left of this one. And you can see sometimes you do have to waste a little, or make sure as I cut it off the bolt that you have enough for seam allowances if you decide you want to fussy cut a section of this. There's always going to be waste. Quilt shops won't always cut down between very neat and tidy. So make sure that you get enough yardage so that you can complete the design that you want or may possibly want in the future. So you kind of have to think ahead a little bit there. Sometimes there are words included, maybe not so much pictures, but maybe messages that you want to include. And so you can see this one has stripes in it. I use this, I think, on a pillow. I'm trying to remember where I used this. But you can decide where you want the words to fall within a design. Maybe you want it centered, so you're going to have to think a little ahead of where you're going to cut, or you want the words maybe lower in the design with flowers at the top. So kind of planning a little bit what's your sweet spot, maybe I should say. What's your sweet spot within the printed border that you really want to have be your focus? Now, sometimes there isn't really a huge focus spot. I went shopping down at a shop near me here and just found a stripe you could do the same thing with. So the stripe could be fussy cut to fit within the parameters of a quilt like this. And you could just have the stripes running around. It may not have a picture within it, but depending on what portion of the design you like, you can, fussy cut that one way or the other to get the length, the width you want for the table topper. So this pattern could be interpreted in other ways. It may not be a picture stripe here. It might just be more of a geographic stripe that would fall within this border. So don't walk away from the printed stripes and the border prints out there. Maybe challenge yourself, get a piece, get a yard or so of it so that you can play with it a little bit and come up with something that looks like you planned so hard to create the design, and all you did was use the stripe to your advantage to run around a table topper. Okay, so in the construction of this, you're going to be using just your all of your normal rotary cutter rulers and mats and everything. There really isn't anything exceptional in this for special tools, which is kind of nice because there are times when we need a special tool and other times where it's like, can I just use what I have? And quilters really appreciate that. Pia says, hello from Denmark. We are glad that you're joining us. Diane says, greetings from beautiful Whidbey Island, Washington. Oh, wow. I'm going to look that up on the map, figure out where that's at. I learned so much geography from doing this show with you guys. We've got Terry saying hello from Michigan. And we've got someone saying hello from Australia. See, we've got our international quilters. We've got Denmark. We've got Australia. We're reaching around the globe and bringing everyone together in our community. Now, when it comes to the construction and what I created here, I was kind of out on a limb because I was trying to create something that would fit on a round table. It was for my mom, who loves to decorate at Christmas time. Since her passing, I've gotten it back. So now I can share it with you. The very center of this quilt is basically a 9 patch. I purchased a snow print. I don't even know if it was from the exact same line or at least a coordinate, but snow prints are easy to come up with. Then I picked a darker navy blue as sashing in here that kind of went after the color of the hat on the snowman. So this is basically just a 9 patch, a varied 9 patch, or you can say that it's a 4 patch with sashing and a cornerstone. But simple construction in 3 rows, and then join that together to have that large 9 patch piece in the center. And your instructions will show you that that's what the very center of the quilt is, how it's created. So we have that large varied 9 patch in the center. And then we're going to put borders on 2 sides, so opposite sides. So I then put on 2 of the snowmen patterns on 2 sides. And remember, when I was cutting out my border print, this little blue border is part of the print. So I was very careful when I was cutting this out to remember to leave behind a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but allow this navy to be on the right side and show and stay straight. Now, when it comes to printed borders, they may not be printed perfectly straight on the fabric. It's just part of the monster of printing on large pieces of fabric. So do your best, if you have something that does have a really defined stripe within it, to leave behind that 1/4 inch seam. I would do, instead of just cutting down through it, I do 1 layer at a time. I take my ruler and make sure that I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance to the edge that I'm going to be attaching to my actual quilt top. And then I went ahead and cut the width that I needed, which left behind just a little bit of this light blue on the outer edge here. It looks like a separate border was added, but it was part of the printed fabric. And it just adds a little bit of a track of light blue there underneath everything. But the biggest concern I had was to leave behind this piece as an inner, looks like an inner border, like it was fussy cut and put on there, but fussy cut the border print in order to get the width that I wanted there. So once those 2 pieces are attached side to side, now we need to create something that is going to go across the 2 ends. Okay, so these are just put on simple as 2 wide borders, flipped out, pressed, but now we have to create the piece that goes along the side here. Remember, this is a border print, all 1 piece. I know it's confusing when you look at it because it looks like that's a cornerstone and you've got pieces coming in. But in my case, this was a print. So if this is all 1 print, you're going to create this piece here to set into the corner. And this is how we're going to go about doing that. You're going to be cutting a square of fabric. In your instructions, it will give you the dimensions for cutting the square. And we'll need 4 squares because we have our 4 triangles, because we have 4 corners that we're trying to create. So by cutting 2 simple squares, you're going to then cut them in half diagonally. And they are a bit oversized so that everything will fit together when we're done. And we're going to trim when we're finished. So I'm cutting diagonally across the square. That's 2 layers that I have there. So I have all 4 of my triangles now cut. And then I need to do the prep work in order to get those to go into the corner. We need to do our sashing here and here and create that little cornerstone that's going to go into the corner there. Now, let's see. Grandma Bird says, refreshing to think about snow, as tomorrow in Michigan is supposed to be in the hundreds, dog days. Definitely. We are going, I think, for a high heat index of 105 to 107 today. So yes, in Iowa, we have got what normally would kind of fall in August. We're getting it this year in July. So we are staying close to the air conditioning. I think every splash pad and swimming pool is open in the neighborhood around. Okay, so we also have Kathy who says hello from Ontario, Canada, and Elaine who's watching from Scotland. We are glad that you're joining in with us. Donna says hello from Holland, Michigan. Wonderful. We're glad that you're watching. Okay, so you've got your triangles now. You have 4 of those, and we need to create those corners. So we're going to use sashing bars. Of course, all of this fabric got used up because I bought just enough to create my project. How many of you do that? How many of you think I'm going to be economical? I'm going to buy just enough fabric so I can finish my project or close, and then come so close that it's scary and are in fear of running out of fabric. I think I'm not the only one. Paula says hello from Wisconsin. Diane, I think it's Diane. Nope. Yeah, Diane says hello from North Carolina. So we're glad you're joining in. Okay, in the instructions, it talks about cutting your sashing. And so you're going to cut some sashing pieces and a little cornerstone. And we're going to create the corner units that will go on to our last 2 sides. So we're going to put that printed border down, and we're going to put a triangle on each side, kind of like wings. And those will finish off the last 2 sides of our project. Now, move everybody over so that I can get to the sewing machine. And we're going to put together our little sashing pieces. And the construction in your diagrams talks about joining. Let's see if I actually follow my own instructions here so that I do it in the same order that you're going to be attempting. Turn it around the right way. Okay. I'm going to orient it just like in the pictures. I have it actually upside down here. Sometimes it really does help keep our brain organized to do it just like the instructions that have been tested, so that when we move it to the sewing machine, we can double check ourselves to make sure we're putting it together right. Okay, so we're going to put a sashing bar onto the triangle, and right sides together, we are going to join that right angle here. And don't worry about the sashing being longer. That's okay. That's the portion we're going to trim later. So for now, we're going to stitch along here. I know that that's kind of an unorthodox approach, but it was the easiest way to oversize it a bit and then trim when we have it completed. So put the sashing on, double checking, make sure that all the cut edges are lined up. Do your best 1/4 inch seaming. Okay. And then we're going to press our seam allowance toward the sashing bar. Always remember to set those seams first. Catch that. We're going to set the seam. We're going to get it hot first. Press it flat. Then we're going to open it up gently. Remember, you've got bias edges along that diagonal of your triangle, so we don't want to distort it. Be very gentle. Whenever we're working with a triangle like that, with that exposed bias edge, we want to be very, very gentle with it. I used to tell my novice level quilters, pretend it's angel butterfly wings, that you don't want to disturb. You want to just be able to lightly handle it, but not overwork or damage that edge. Now we're going to put together the cornerstone and the sashing. So right sides together on that. Just a short little seam to put it together. This is a project that doesn't really take all that much time. That very center portion done as a varied 9 patch is very easy in its construction. I think the hardest part of this project is deciding where to cut your printed stripe. So getting which portion of it you want to include in your project. Okay, now take my threads out of the way there. The seam allowance is going to need to go back toward the sashing so that we have opposing seams when we join these together. Always thinking ahead to make it the easiest as possible, and be able to get those intersections to look really nice when we're done. That opposing seam is kind of a nice little add-on where maybe we won't have to pin as much because of the locking of those seams. Now we're going to join the sashing bar with the square to the bottom edge here, right sides together. If I work from this side as I stitch, my seam allowance here is going upward, and as I stitch this, it will push it toward the opposing seam on the other side, and then I get that locking seam. If you don't feel confident, just put in a pin to hold it together. But by stitching in that direction against that seam, it does kind of push it down a little tighter. So it's just a little trick for helping in the construction. Make sure that your cut edges are all aligned. There's nothing wrong with taking a break from stitching. I always make sure I stop with the needle down and then making sure to readjust if you need to make sure those cut edges stay together. As a long armor, I run across the fact that sometimes quilters have seam allowances that kind of fade. The bottom one fades away underneath, and then we have an opening in the seam, and the seam isn't complete, and we have a hole in our quilt top. To avoid that is to take that time. Don't go too fast when you're seaming. Make sure those cut edges stay together as you take it through the machine. Now we can take this over to the pressing, and we can give it that last heat it up, and then press outward. A lot of times we're usually pressing toward the darker fabric. So in this case, the sashing is the darker fabric. Once you have those constructed, you're going to make 4 of these exactly the same. And then you're going to add it to the ends. And I'm going to use my diagram here instead of sewing 4 of them. Here, this represents our striped print, okay? And we're going to add one of these triangles that we created, these corners, like wings on each side. We're going to make 2 that match. So if you have something like snowmen or faces on Santas, or you have birds that are flying a certain direction, make sure the orientation within that stripe is the way that you want it to appear in the project. Note, I have all of the snowmen, so while you're sitting at the table, they're smiling at you. You could orient them the other way and have them all smiling toward the center, towards each other. But that's up to you. You're the quilter. You decide which way you want your snowmen or Santas or birds or whatever character. If you have, maybe you have Disney characters or something. If you want them oriented facing outward or facing in, but try to keep them all going the same direction so that you have a consistency around your project. He says, I buy fabric according to the motto, one is none, 2 is 1. My stash is growing accordingly. Yes. Maybe sometimes, a lot of times when I worked in quilt shops, people would ask me, if you don't know what you're using a fabric for, how much of it should you get? That's a loaded question. 1 is a nibble, 1 yard is a nibble. 2 is your serious, and 3 is I might be using it as a border. So you decide where you are. Are you just taking a nibble? Are you getting more serious? Or are you going to use it as a border on a quilt? Because 3 yards will make a border on a very large quilt. So it's always up to you what you buy, but make sure that you have enough for the possibilities. That's my last word on how much to buy when it comes to fabric. Christine says, I usually buy 1/4 to 1/3 of a yard extra. That is a good idea. A lot of patterns will have a little buffer built into them if you're working off a pattern. Whenever I write a pattern, I'm usually trying to include at least 1 more cut of whatever the widest piece is in case you make a mistake, so that there is not just exactly enough fabric, because I know I make mistakes when I'm cutting, and I pray that whoever, when I was first starting, whoever wrote the pattern gave me a little grace so that I have enough fabric. So that's why I always include at least one more cut width of, say in this case, it would be like for this fabric, I would probably say one more cut that width of across the fabric. So you would have enough in case you made a mistake. It's always nice to have just a little extra. Running short is just disheartening. Dorlee says, I always buy extra because I know myself. We all know each other very well. We make mistakes, and we are quick to be very honest that it's not fun to be short on fabric. Okay. Once you have your matching units, the pieces that have your print with the wings on each side, those are then added to the top and bottom of your project. And then you have it completed. And I'm going to just bring this up so that I can talk about, there we go, how these are oversized. Now I'm going to match up the seam allowance so you can see this is longer than the project. That allows you to do that trim. So once you get your longer, there's my other purple piece here. I put it away from myself. We're just going to pretend we have the fabric along here. When you get this stitched together, you can then clean up the angle however you wish. In this case, if you want to just look at the actual project on the front cover of the pattern, did an angle cut between these points. So where the seam of the triangle met the printed stripe, I went from corner to corner to clean up that. So that's why it's longer, so that you can make a nice angle cut consistent on all four sides as you put this together. That means then that you have this really fun angle to bind. And it doesn't take bias binding in this case. It just takes a little bit of thought on how to create the correct miter for these corners in order to do straight of grain binding around the outer edge of the quilt. And I did call for, I believe, cutting the binding at 2 1/4 inch, just a little bit narrower, making it a little easier when you're doing those unusual angles there. But I wanted to talk about a real quick little trick that you can learn to do the binding on hexagons. That's the angle within this quilt. It's not a true hexagon because the sides are longer, but yet this similar angle of a hexagon. And we do have tutorials within our different platforms that will help you learn how to do the binding on a hexagon. And they have better camera angles than I can get here with close-ups to help you. But I wanted to give you some little tips on getting that binding so that you get a nice corner and it's not extended, it's not rounded, and it has a nice clean outer edge that everybody will be like so impressed that you could bind that hexagon edge, because it's not the right angle. It's a little bit different. So I did just a portion of one here, hoping that we can kind of see the hexagon binding. You would go along the first side. What I usually am doing is thinking about dividing that angle in half and giving yourself kind of a guideline underneath so you know where to start and stop. But you're going to be 1/4 inch in from each side. You may need to take it out of the machine as you stitch along, trying to stop at about 1/4 inch. So you're going down the first side and you're going to stop and do a little tack stitch to hold your fabric in place. And then you're going to do that little fold like you do when you do a regular corner, except I'm going to, let me see, I'm going to put a piece of white underneath here so you can see. This is my green binding. I'm going to put a piece of fabric underneath there so you can see. That's my fold. My fold doesn't go all the way up to this cut edge. It's short so that it creates a different angle here. My little triangle of fabric that stands up from the quilt As I go back down my second side to attach this, it's a smaller piece here, and the angle is different, so that when I take it out and roll it to the back side, I get the proper angle front and back. And if I can fold and hold it, you can see that that will then fold and make that proper angle going around. It may take a little bit of practice. You may want to simulate a hexagon corner so that you can practice that corner turn. But remember, when you do the flip up and back down, it's not all the way up to this edge like you do when you bind a square quilt. It's shorter than that, so that I'll put that white fabric back underneath there. You can see kind of the angle here, and the center where down here where the pieces of the binding kind of bump up each other and this piece extends, that makes an angle from the tip toward the center of your quilt, dividing up that space that's left in half. So that might be really confusing to some, but you can go after looking for binding a hexagon in our tutorials. There are a lot of good free tutorials on our platforms that will teach you how to do that, binding of that hexagon, so that when you are then turning the fabric to the back side, it looks like you're a pro every time getting that angle perfect. So take advantage of the things that we offer. Sometimes people want to say, well, I'd like to come in for the live events, but go to our website and check out all the great little tutorials and the tips and things you can pick up to make your patchwork look fabulous. And in the meantime, think cold, wintry thoughts. Christmas, Wonderland might be your next fun cooling off project. Thanks for joining me.